Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Randy Vawdrey is a nurse practitioner, the current chief medical officer for A Mind for All Seasons, and is board certified with the AANP. With 20 years of experience working and managing busy urgent care, family medicine, outpatient and inpatient mental health, weight loss, and hormone optimization practice, Randy has treated and improved the lives of thousands of patients. Since his graduation in 1998 from Brigham Young University in nursing, Randy's career has blossomed into a focus on the identification and treatment of neuroinflammatory disorders. This includes the treatment of traumatic brain injury, also known as TBI, lingering symptoms from concussions, integrative treatments of mental health disorders, and the prevention and treatment of dementia. He has also been the program director for Portneuf Valley Hospital's Gerontological Psychiatric Hospital. He has served as the director of the Psychotropic Drug Review at the Idaho State Veterans Home and served as the Physicians Immediate Care and Physicians Optimal Health as the CEO. Randy has written over 1,000 treatment plans addressing various forms of brain fog and neurodegenerative disorders. You can find Randy on his website at www.randybawdrey.com. Randy Vawdrey, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Casey, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
It's such an honor to host you. I've had the joy of talking with one of our mutual friends, Hal Kramer. Hal introduced me to Eric Collett, who then introduced me to you. And I'm just so grateful that I've been able to meet all of you. Some of you I've gotten to meet in person. This story is absolutely wonderful that the people are out there making strides in mental health and actually improving the lives of so many people out there. It's just so inspiring to hear about.
Oh, thank you so much. It's actually really fun to do. It's fun to take someone who feels like there's no hope, and then you just give them hope bundled up with a bow, and they take it and run with it, and they do amazing.
That's awesome. I love that. I've already given more publicity than I like to Brigham Young University. We are going to be approaching football season here pretty soon. And as a diehard University of Utah fan, I'm actually looking forward. Our two schools are now in the same conference for football. So it's pretty much guaranteed we're going to be playing each other every year like we used to.
Dude, I know. I was so excited too, because for a long time, we kind of separated. We didn't get to play. That rivalry got lost in the shuffle when Utah went to the Pac-12 and BYU stayed independent. So it's kind of fun to see them get back together now, and the arm wrestle continues.
That's awesome. Yeah, so it was pretty funny the way this all went down, because Utah did go to the Pac-12, which is now, next to dead in the water, and BYU went independent. Well, they got called up to a bigger conference, and now we were without a conference to be in it. So the tables had kind of turned. And one of my favorite videos when that happened, and then Utah got invited into the Big 12 or whatever the conference, Big 12, is it the scene from The Office, where Michael Scott learns that Toby is back working at the office, but he's the face of BYU, and he walks to the back and he sees Toby, and Toby has the face of the University of Utah. Michael Scott just yells, "No!"
Oh, hilarious. Yeah, that's awesome.
Best video. Looking forward to some fun football games. It got a little bit nasty there with the rivalry. It's been a lot better in the last few years. So hopefully it can be a really fun thing around here. It's always such a fun thing to look forward to.
That's the way it is with all rivalries. Some rivalries can be just aggressive, and there's fans. I'm a pretty avid BYU football fan, and I've traveled a fair amount. I feel like I've attended most of the really big college football venues, and it's been really fun to go, because we'll go out there and we're excited to be in this venue, and we're wondering how we're going to be received. And the crowds have been amazing. They're kind. They welcome us, right? And I think, oh my goodness, BYU and Utah fans have to be a little bit better at recognizing it's a rivalry. This is fun, and sometimes it gets nasty, but I learned some nice lessons as I traveled around the country going to those games.
Man, that's so fun. I'll just give you one piece of advice. If you ever have to travel to Arizona State, I would avoid that one. I felt like I was going to get shanked in that stadium when we played them there. Not a fun environment, let me tell you.
Oh, you know what? Not to throw shade on the University of Wyoming at Laramie, but I remember as a high school student, I went to a BYU football game in Laramie, and I went in wearing BYU blue, and I came out wearing beer, nacho cheese, and Coca-Cola, because they just showered us with all of the food. And I thought, wow, that rivalry was brutal. And, I was just a kid. I was afraid. I didn't want to get my butt kicked by a cowboy.
That's hilarious. Well, at least you had some snacks later on in the evening.
That's right. I didn't starve to death.
Well, as much as I'd love to talk football for the rest of the hour, we are here to talk about mental health. And I'm just curious, we heard Eric's story and how he met you, and that seemed extremely serendipitous. You guys, he described it as definitely a synergy between the two of you. I believe he said just 1+1 = 10. And you guys have been able to work together incredibly. But I want to hear your own personal story and how you got interested in the medical industry to begin with, and how really didn't really have much of a tie with things like nutrition, and how that kind of over time became a little bit more of an interest of yours.
Yeah, I grew up in a family that didn't have any health insurance. And so when you got sick, you just rubbed some dirt on it and went to school and hoped you got better, right? That was my parents' philosophy, and it was a financial issue. And so I think I was always intrigued with medicine. I looked at the medical community with high esteem, and they were really smart, and I wanted to do that. My dad was a locksmith, and so in the summers I would work in the lock shop down in Salt Lake City, and just really wanted to go to med school. And when I was in college, I didn't have a scholarship, so I was working night shifts and weekends, and I had a hard time competing with all the kids that were, that didn't have to work full time or work night shift to get through school. So I finished school with a GPA that was like 3.6, and they told me I wasn't going to be able to get into med school. So I didn't even make an effort. I look back on that and think, God, that was lame. I should have absolutely made an effort. But instead, I went into nursing school. I worked in a trauma unit at LDS Hospital, which is now IHC's flagship trauma center. I was in the shock trauma and the neuro ICU for a couple of years, and I was working to get on Lifeline. That's the trend I wanted to be on. I was very much into adrenaline medicine. Well, when I was working there, this is like 99, 2000, both Lifelight from IHC and UMed helicopters went down in a year period of time, with the entire crews passing away from those accidents. And it made me rethink my rhythm. I thought, maybe I don't want to go into this. I have 2 little kids and a sweet wife. And so I thought, well, I don't want to work weekends every week, and I want to change pace. So I went to graduate school and moved to Idaho State University, took a job in Pocatello in a nursing home. And that I could work that job while working my way through graduate school. And I became the director of Psychotropic drug review. For those who aren't familiar with that term, there's a rule or a law in senior care medicine, geriatric medicine, that you have to make an ongoing attempt every quarter to reduce their psychiatric meds, because psychiatric meds to a senior person are toxic. They're just fraught with terrible side effects. In fact, the FDA has given a black box warning that any senior on these medicines, you have to attempt to reduce them because they'll cause death, all-cause mortality.
Never heard of that. That's still current today?
It's current law. Yep.
No
So
idea. Wow.
the law mandates psychotropic drug review. So I chaired this committee at the hospital where we would look at every individual that lived in this nursing home and psychiatric hospital. There was about 90 people, and all of them were on wicked doses of these medicines. And my job was to try to reduce them. What do you do? What's the goal? They all have complex dementia, complex mental health challenges, but the goal is to reduce them because those medicines may be worse than the disease themselves, right? So I would make an effort to reduce them, and then they would all deteriorate. So we'd go back up, and then we met the rules of the law because we made the attempt to reduce. But the whole time I'm doing this, I think, my gosh, we suck at practicing medicine because we have no answers for these people. And that stuck in my mind. I was invited to go to a fellowship at Harvard at McLean Hospital that was sponsored by a drug company called Eli Lilly. And one of the drug companies sponsored me to go back with our local pharmacist, who, interestingly enough, is now the governor's appointed director of the Idaho Board of Pharmacy, Nikki Chopsky. She and I are good friends. We went back to Harvard in 2001, 2002, and completed this fellowship. And the fellowship was designed to teach us how to assess seniors and lower their medicines. But the challenge with that is that there was no other answers either. We would just use different medicines, and in the end, no one really got better. And so that seeded within my mind the need to try to get better. And it just always felt like an insecurity, right? It was an itch I could not scratch. And then in 2005, after graduating, I partnered with a local physician named Dr. Willie, total stud and brilliant. And when we were at closing, we bought an urgent care called Physicians Immediate Care. When we bought that urgent care, he handed me the business card of a dietitian and said, "Hey, I want to hire this guy." And I said, "Well, we're buying an urgent care. Why are we hiring a dietitian?" And his statement was, "You can't help people get healthy, Randy, if we don't teach them how to eat." And I left the closing table and thought, okay, looks like I don't know enough about diet to be any good. So that started that journey in 2005 till current, where we looked at all of the non-pharmacy interventions like diet and exercise and nutritional supplements and brain stimulation therapies, hyperbaric medicine, all of those types of things. So I've spent the last 20 years trying to get better at helping people with complex neurological problems actually get better instead of just medicating them. And it's been amazing.
That is amazing. I just think of the contrast between how frustrating it would have felt to just be going in circles with like, we're trying to reduce the meds, but they need more and more meds. How are you going to solve that? That must have been so frustrating to then find there are other things that you can do to help people. And I know there's lots of different modalities we're going to be talking about today. I asked Eric this question, and I'll ask it to you as well. Just I'd love to get your opinion on it. And when I asked the question, Eric responded by saying, you know what, there's lots of different things we need to figure out, all kinds of different modalities to be able to help the individual. And I asked him specifically about nutrition, if in his opinion, that was pretty much the best and biggest lever to pull to be able to help somebody. He answered again that there's lots of different ways to do it. How would you answer that question? How high up, as far as all the things that you can use to help somebody with mental disorder, how high up would you place something like nutrition?
Loaded question. And I think it's very high on the priority scale. But the way I explain it to people is there are people who are lean and mean, they're thin, they have a low blood sugar, they have a good muscle base, and they still suffer with terrible depression or anxiety, or they've had a bad concussion, or they have dementia because there's a strong family history and a link to that. And so if we beat that drum day in and day out, diet, 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 occasionally you come across those people where they have been very intentional about their diets and they still have neurological problems. So it goes back to the most important intervention is to find the weak links in the individuals that you're working with. And because we live in a society that's mostly overweight and a society that's insulin resistant and pre-diabetic and somewhat stationary, right? I'm not judging and I'm not indicting the world. I'm just saying the environment that we live in typically is a fast food, have it my way, sedentary, computer-based workout system, right? There's just not a lot there. Those individuals' diet becomes essential. It becomes very important. But I can tell you, 25% of my clients have great metabolic health. They've been very focused on the lifestyle piece and they still got problems. And so for those people, we have to go down those pathways to identify where's their weak link.
Love that. Yeah, that's a great way to answer that question. I appreciate that this is very, very nuanced. As far as like core tenets of nutrition, what are some of the things that you have come to learn or believe more strongly now than you did before? Like what would constitute kind of good nutritional principles without getting too much in the sticks of like what the actual diet has to be, if that makes sense?
Yeah, awesome question. And I've gone through iterations of how to approach this. I grew up with a practitioner, Dr. Willie, who taught all about kind of a bodybuilding style diet, which was higher in protein, higher in healthy fats, much lower in carbohydrates, and carbohydrates were very intentional. Carbohydrates were revolved around food timing. So you consume more carbohydrates during your workouts, and then you backed off the further away from your workout you got, so that we could manage insulin spikes and so forth. Now, I think that I'm sure being in the exercise world, you're familiar with muscle-centric medicine, Gabrielle Lyon's philosophy, and I've kind of taken her philosophy. And when I write a diet for someone, I'm really focused on making sure it's protein adequate. And that's a loaded statement, and there's a lot of disagreement in the medical literature about what is adequate amount of protein. So if I'm just keeping it simple for our audience, and maybe our audience doesn't need to be simple, we could dig into the weeds with this. But I'll typically say, hey, I want you to get a minimum of 100 grams of protein, and I want it to be an animal base. because that when you consume that, it's going to bring with it a healthy amount of natural fat as well. So we kind of tackle the protein and fat at the same time. So making it simple, look, 100 grams of protein minimum is your base. And then from there, we identify how much carbohydrate do you need based on insulin resistance, your A1C, your level of physical activity, what your timing is, and so forth. And that's kind of my simplified way to help a client. If I only got 10 minutes to sort through this, that's kind of my basis. Start with protein, make sure it's nutritionally adequate for their activity level, and then kind of fold in your proteins or your fats and carbohydrates based on their metabolic health.
You've been hanging out with Dr. Ben Bickman down at BYU, haven't you? I knew it. I've seen you.
I love Ben Bickman.
I've seen you in presentations, and you do just as good of a job. This is a huge compliment, by the way. You do just as good of a job presenting as he does. He's one of the very best presenters I've ever seen, and he does such a wonderful job making that simple. Focus on the protein. Proteins in nature always come with fats. Focus on animal-centric proteins, and just let the carbohydrates slide down to be where you can tolerate that kind of a diet, because that will address that insulin resistance, which, as he writes about and why we get sick, is the core principle of so many of these chronic diseases that we see. So I love that approach.
Yeah, thank you. Ben is a hero. I love what he has talked about. And I remember a statement he said that that the best God-given protein was dairy, was milk, because it has a little bit of carbohydrate, a little bit of fat, and a little bit of protein. And that's always stuck with me, thinking, okay, how do we get a natural food item that kind of has the spectrum? And milk is really the only one that has all three. But anyway, that's a side note. And I like Ben Bickman, so I appreciate that compliment.
He's the best. Yeah, I got to meet him in person at a conference a few months ago, and it was just amazing to see that he is every bit the character that he portrays, and is just like endlessly humble, like just an awesome guy. And his presentation
Look,
was.
you just keep floating back to throwing sunshine at BYU. Nice job.
I know. I hate this. I hate this. For you too. I'll do it for you too. That's it. And maybe Kalani Sataki as well. Okay. So let's back up a little bit. I really appreciate that insight on nutrition. That's something we talk about a lot here. People are very well familiar with some of the guests that we've had on, like Dr. Georgia E., Dr. Chris Palmer, who have written about the metabolic, the way we're connecting neurodegenerative diseases with problems in the mitochondria. Let's go there and talk about the large way that we diagnose different things. And I've heard you talk about this before, so I think I know where you're going to go with this. But we have all of these different things that we diagnose based on this guide. I'm going to goof up the acronym. Is it DCM, DCSM-5 or something?
DSM-5.
Okay.
Diagnostics and Statistics Manual for Mental Health. So yes.
Got it. Just so many different things. Chris Palmer really put this into perspective when he talked about it in his book, like how you make these diagnoses seems impossible to be able to do. And they all seem like different. How would you respond to that? Is depression vastly different than anxiety? Is vastly different than, your run-of-the-mill dementia, all the way down to like brain fog? Like, are all those different things? Or are we basically talking about the same thing?
Yeah, I think that we're basically talking about the same thing. But to give context behind my answer, the DSM-5, I think it's at 5, might actually be at 6 now, but the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual is looking at characteristics or symptoms of disease. So if I take a mnemonic that I learned in school, was SIGECAPS, SIGECAPS. If you want to meet the clinical diagnosis for depression, a person has to say, number one, I feel depressed. And then they have to have at least 5 of the next 7 things. Sleep disorder, I means they've lost interest in things they previously enjoyed. G means they feel guilty all of the time. E is their energy levels in the toilet. C means they can't concentrate anymore. A means they've had changes in their appetite, so they want to sit on a couch and munch and eat all day long. P is psychomotor retardation, meaning that they move really slow, right? And then S is they have suicidal ideation. So a good psychiatrist, according to the current method used today, is they start asking questions. Now, Casey, I'm going to ask you these questions and say, someone who has a concussion, do they have sleep problem? They're not interested in doing things they previously enjoyed. They might have had changes in their appetite, or they don't move very quickly anymore. Maybe they think, I'd rather die than have this headache. So you see those symptoms don't only correlate with one illness. So we use the statistics manual to say they qualify for this diagnosis if they have these characteristics. But in my opinion, and I think Christopher Palmer's opinion, we're focused on the symptoms. We're not focused on the underlying cause of the disease. And if we focused on the underlying cause of the disease, maybe that individual wouldn't suffer from those terrible symptoms anymore.
Interesting. Do they have to have all of those symptoms or just some of them?
Yeah, so it depends on the diagnosis. So that statistics manual will say, if you've had those symptoms for at least 6 months, this would be clinical depression. If you've had those symptoms for less than 6 months, maybe it's considered an adjustment disorder, that you had a kind of an emotional trauma and you're trying to adjust to that, like a death in the family. So there's all these statistical benchmarks that have to be hit to qualify, if you will, for the ICD-10 diagnosis. And I get behind that, the way we bill insurance. You can't just bill insurance for grouping of symptoms. You bill insurance based on the diagnosis code. So there's methodology behind the madness. But the question that it begs the larger question, we went down this road so far that maybe we kind of backed out of what's actually causing the disease, because sometimes I get criticized for this. Depression is not a deficiency in Prozac. It's not a deficiency in Zoloft. It's a deficiency in something, and Chris Palmer would say it's a metabolic disorder, right? It's a deficiency in the production of ATP in the brain. And if we can figure that out, people don't have those symptoms anymore. That's not designed to be insensitive for anyone who might be taking Prozac or Zoloft. I prescribe those medicines. I'm a fan. It's okay. But we do a disservice to patients when we stop trying to figure out why they're struggling through those symptoms and just medicate them in lieu of figuring out the underlying cause.
Very well explained. I love that. Where are we today in the state of medications and pharmacological solutions for some of these mental disorders? Have we made much progress since this started to kind of enter your consciousness about 20 years ago?
Yeah, I think you could make the argument that we're not better, because the mental health of America right now is in the toilet, right? So many people are just struggling with very complex mental health challenges. And we do talk therapy. There are problems with access to care, but there's a lot of people who do have access to care and do get medications, and they continue to struggle with these. And Casey, interestingly enough, do you know what the number one side effect to most of these medications is? It's weight gain.
Yeah, you hear that a lot.
Right? So people will say, I didn't feel very good, so I started Zoloft and I feel better, but I put on 20 pounds. And Chris Palmer would say, that's a problem, because maybe metabolic disorder is contributing to the depression in the first place. So we initiate the treatment and we aggravate the metabolic disorder, and then around the track we go. It's just this cycle. It's a problem.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I love addressing it in that way. Like, let's ask the questions, what could be the cause of these things versus let's just cover up the symptoms by some of these medications. And again, like, I know you do prescribe some of these. What would be the expected result of somebody that's prescribed one of these medications? What would be like best case scenario? I know that's a very difficult question to answer, because every medication, every case would be a little bit different. But just staying in the world of standard of care without asking those questions of what other things can we change in somebody's lifestyle, what would you expect as like a best case scenario for somebody who enters that course of treatment?
Awesome question. And I want to start with my disclaimer. I'm not anti-medicine. I'm not critical of people that take these medicines. I'm not throwing shade on you if you're on Zoloft or an antipsychotic or something for bipolar. Not at all. And I respond to your question in this way. People will come to me. Let me give you a very common example. And I spoke at the Nurse Practitioners Continuing Ed Conference last year on this. I worked in urgent care late on a Saturday, and I was covering for another one of our providers. And when someone comes into the clinic, here's the rhythm. I open up their medical record and I look at their vital signs and their chief complaint. And their chief complaint might be, I hurt my back. I'm here for back pain. And I look at their list of medicines. And on this particular day, I don't know what it was, but I would say that 8 out of the 15 people that I saw had attention deficit medicine on board. They were taking Adderall or Strattera or something for attention deficit disorder. And most of these were not kids. Most of these were adults. And so I found myself going into the room and introducing myself. Hey, Casey, I'm Randy, and I'm here to figure out what's going on with your back pain. And through that discussion, I would review their medicines. Hey, I noticed that you're taking Adderall. Tell me a little bit about that. Is that something where you've had ADD since you were a kid? And I had one person that's like, no. Dude, I graduated college magna cum laude. I was at the top of my class. I'm an accountant. I manage spreadsheets for a very large company. And I used to be able to pound through spreadsheets all day long, and I can't stay focused past 11 o'clock in the morning. That medicine's just got to keep me on track. I never said anything because I was there to address back pain. And I walked out of the room thinking, why in the world could this dude graduate magna cum laude with a master's degree at the top of their class, and at 45 years old now, they can't get past 11 o'clock without attention deficit medicine? Like, to me, there's a problem there that needs to be addressed. And so to answer your question, how do I handle that? When people come in and say, hey, I can't manage a spreadsheet anymore, I have ADD, I always say, what do you think's driving that? Well, I don't know. That's why I'm here, Randy. Would you tell me why I'm addressing it? And then I start asking them a series of questions and walking through, well, could it be this? Did you have COVID? Are you a little bit struggling with weight right now? Are you pre-diabetic? Do you drink sodas all day long? Have you had a head injury? Have you had a hysterectomy? What's your hormone health look like? And as I start doing that, people start realizing, oh, you mean that could contribute to my ADD? You better believe it. So it always ends like this. Look, if we meet the clinical criteria for stimulants, I'm going to give you a little bit of medicine on one condition that I have. You follow up with me in primary care and you start working through the criteria to figure out why your brain's not working very well. You got to do some baseline diagnostic tests, and we got to start working through this. And if you come back and say, oh my gosh, life changer with that medicine, but I think I need a little bit higher dose, my answer is going to be not until we check your omega-3s, dude. Not until we look at your hormone health. Not until we do a VOMS assessment to rule out concussive symptoms. And when I do that, people are so grateful because they're like, oh, he gave me a little medicine to help me today, and he's going to help me figure out why in the hell I'm having this problem in the first place.
I really appreciate that. What has been your general experience? Again, another tricky question to answer, but just generally speaking, what is the willingness of the patient to take on some of these things? Are they more than happy to just say, like, no, I'm just going to take my medicine and not change anything in my life or lifestyle? Or have you noticed that people are very much willing to address some of those things?
Oh, almost 100%, they're willing to address those things. It's very seldom that someone comes in and says, no, dude, I don't want it. I just want Adderall. And if that ever happens, which it virtually never does, if that happens, I'm like, dude, I'm not your guy. You got to go somewhere else. If you just want someone to give prescription medicines, you got to move on and go to someone that just does that. My goal is to try to figure out what's wrong. And I feel like that if you're willing to work through that, we can get a pretty good idea. In fact, do you mind if I share a story?
Please, love to.
23-year-old electrician comes to my office in that exact same scenario. I can't stay focused. I can't do my work. And all we did was talk about diet. And he said, he's super honest with me. He's like, okay, I get breakfast at the Maverick gas station, and then I get lunch at Wendy's, and then I usually pick up Pizza Hut on my way home. No exaggeration. I'm like, oh, that's such good news. Now I know why you have ADD, right? Because that stuff will just poison your brain. That had never occurred to him that that's why he had attention deficit problems. So consistent with the plan I just told you, I started him on a little bit of medicine and did some lab tests. And I came back and said, my gosh, you look protein deficient baseline on your labs, and your omega-3s are almost non-existent. So let's start you on a high dose of an omega supplement, and I want you to get 100 grams of protein a day. This kid went down to Costco and bought an entire flat of tuna fish because he says, I love tuna, but I'm just too lazy. He buys this entire flat. He says he spent like $250 on tuna. And he said, I could not believe it that in about 2 weeks, I found myself not needing my afternoon dose of Adderall because at lunchtime, I made myself 2 tuna melts. And he says it was so life-changing that at Christmas time, I went to my parents' house. He's got a little brother who's probably on the spectrum. He's got some neurological challenges that have been ill-defined. And on Christmas morning, he made tuna melts for his entire family. And then he gave this little kind of in service. He's like, hey, mom and dad, I really think that my little brother's health could get better if we just get some healthy proteins in him every day. Let me share my experience. And he told him his experience with Adderall. His little brother became my client. And when I saw him recently, I said, what do you like to eat? And he says, I eat tuna melts like my big brother. I mean, it was so cool. But who would have thought that just increasing your protein intake actually changes your neurological health to the point you don't need as much attention deficit medicine?
Yeah, that's amazing. This is why I find this topic so inspiring. Is like the story, the narrative that most of us are told is that people are lazy slobs. They just want the medication. They're only going to get 10 minutes with the doctor anyway. So let's just give them the medication, and they're just not willing to change any of those things. I think it's the opposite problem in my experience. People are willing to change. They are very smart. They're just not getting a lot of the right information.
Yeah, and the reality is they only get 10 minutes with their doctor. It's not because the patient isn't interested in more time and attention and TLC. The
Right.
rhythm is set up like that. It kind of bites, right? I've had days where I'm working urgent care. We're kind of a fast food society in general. We want it our way and we want it right now. So one big thing we're pushing in our urgent care is that's not your family practice. And a lot of these people that come in for medication refills at the urgent care really need to establish with a provider and drill deeper on some of these things. And I think when patients are given the opportunity to do that, most will embrace it and say, yeah, I really do want to make my health better. I want to age more gracefully.
Man, I love that. Okay, so we talked a little bit about nutrition as a primary cause for some of these things. And so if we're saying we want to promote healthy fats and proteins, animal sources, we need to say we need those nutrients, right? Those are essential nutrients in our diet. We need the proteins and fats. We want to kind of reduce the carbohydrates to maybe minimize the insulin resistance. So we're getting nutrients there, but we're also getting anti-nutrients in a lot of the other food that you mentioned. My top few that I like to say is like seed oils and things like, flour and sugar that's really prevalent, especially combine all those things in the most delicious foods that we have. So I think we kind of understand that a little bit as far as the things that are contributing to health and also taking away from health as far as nutrition goes. What are some of the other major causes that you're noticing that are on the rise today besides nutrition that are contributing to poor mental health?
One of the top of the list for neurological disorders is blood flow issues. And when I talk about blood flow, I usually use the term vascular, but I'm going to use blood flow to keep it simple in this case. Many individuals have a blood flow issue that they already know about, but they don't equate it to neurological health. So, for example, if a man has erectile dysfunction, he has blood flow issues downstairs. And if he has blood flow issues downstairs, he's probably got blood flow issues upstairs as well. Individuals might have peripheral vascular disease or a history of vasculitis, or they have varicose veins, or they got high blood pressure or low blood pressure or a rapid heart rate. We call that tachycardia. Each of those disease names reflect in some way there's a compromised blood flow issue. And I am absolutely convinced you cannot have good neurological health unless you 100% support blood flow to the brain.
Gotcha. Yeah, I love that answer as well. So as we're talking about some of these treatments, again, we've covered nutrition. That's a really good example, like the blood flow issue. What are some other ways that you have found to be very helpful for improving that? Are things like temperature exposure or light exposure helpful in that context?
They can be, but the number one low-hanging fruit across the board is exercise. The more a person moves, the better their blood flow gets throughout the entire body. Okay, so that just has to be a baseline. That when I sit down and visit with people about neurological health, they're looking for the deep, mystic, complex answers of what can I do to improve my neurological health. And I'm such a buzzkill because I come back to the table and I'm like, dude, we got to change your diet and you got to get moving on a regular basis. Here's another just goofy story. A good friend and client is an attorney, and he came to me and said, is there any way to manage diabetes without using diabetic meds, whether they be oral or injectable? And I said, yeah, let's have you eat a low carb diet. And I want you to go on a walk for 15 minutes after every time you eat. If you eat once a day, you just have to walk. And this is outside of their exercise routine. Okay. So you got to do your exercise plus 15 minutes every time you put something in your mouth. And so he came in with his A1C being a certain value. I don't remember the value without looking. Some in the high sixes, which is diabetic. And so we live in Idaho where it's freezing cold in the wintertime. And he told me he'd go outside and start his car and turn on the heater. And then he'd go on a walk because he ate breakfast, right? So he ate breakfast, would start his car, turn on the heater, and go on a 15-minute walk through his neighborhood in the cold until the ice on his windshield melted. And then he went to work. If he met a client for lunchtime, he'd go to lunch. He'd do his best to eat a low-carb diet, right? We're not talking about eating perfect. He's still eating out a lot. And then he'd walk out to his car and he would go on a 15-minute walk before he went back to the office. Doing this for 3 months completely brought his A1C down into the normal range with no medicine, no radical changes to his diet, but just the movement made a difference. So when we talk about getting blood flow to the brain, if we can just convince our client or our sphere of influence, if you could get up out of your chair and go walk for 15 minutes, go do stairs, go walk around your neighborhood, just get moving a little bit more. So it doesn't have to just be, my wife once said to me, we're kind of a goofy society. We think we can go to the gym and work out for 1 hour and then sit around for 23 hours a day. And we say we have an active lifestyle, right? I chuckled at that. I'm like, oh my gosh, my wife is brilliant. She's right. It needs to be aggressive exercise in the morning and then a little bit of activity scheduled all throughout the day to promote that blood flow. So that's the first one. Another thing is your brain gets blood flow when you use it in certain ways. So for example, if I put you on an MRI machine and I had you go like this with your hand as fast as you could, and you're just cranking like this, and I'm watching blood flow to your brain, I could find an area that manages the motor function of your brain and it would light up with blood flow because you're doing this activity, right? So one of the goals would be to stimulate different parts of our brain to do things that we're not used to doing so we can push blood flow to that tissue. And it sounds complex, but it's actually really fun. You practice medicine through exercise. And so you're always getting people to do different forms of exercise. And you've watched people that do like animalistic exercises where they're moving like an ape or they're walking like a crab. It's amazing how fast people poop out doing these simple exercises, and you're completely using your brain in a different way to do those than you would just running on a treadmill.
Totally. Yeah. No, it's amazing. I reflect on this all the time that like when I started my career in personal training 17 years ago, nobody was talking about mental health, physical, any kind of exercise was only for the body. And now you ask me, like, it can help with the body for sure, and you should do it. But I believe it's so much more about mental health. So I absolutely love that. I do think the comment about the society thing was really funny. The gym that I worked for over a decade, where I was doing metabolic testing for really high end, they've got lots of locations, lots of clubs around the country. At the higher end locations, they actually had valet parking. So think about that. Like you come in to a gym, valet park your car, and go in and walk on the treadmill.
Yeah,
Really?
it's so true, right? It's so true that's such a perfect example of how we get distorted into thinking we have an active lifestyle because of this one thing that we do for 20 minutes. It just has to be promoted throughout.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so on the note of exercise, is there any particular type of exercise? Is walking better than lifting weights? Is there anything you like to prescribe, or how do you kind of think about those things?
That's a tough answer because you can find research that supports it all. You can find aggressive research that cardiovascular activity lowers the risk of heart disease, and heart disease is the #1 killer in America. You can find research that supports weight training and strength training and bodybuilding. My business partner of many years, Dr. Willie, in the medical practice, is really big into bodybuilding and strength training and so forth. So I have a much more kind of personalized perspective where if I tell an individual like, Casey, I don't know you real well, but if I told you that the one exercise that was the very best and you need to be doing this every day was choreographed water aerobics, you might say, dude, I don't have access to a pool and I don't even like to swim, so I'm not going to do it. So I've tried hard not to tell people what to do. I've just said, you've got to do something. So let's identify what is most accessible to you. Can you, if you just can't afford a gym membership and you just work from home, let's incorporate stairs and push-ups and chair squats and so forth. And we're going to come up with kind of a CrossFit routine that meets your financial needs and your transportation schedule. And other people have access to everything. And so my goal is to identify the best thing is whatever you're willing to do and you have access to, and then we just try to build from there. So maybe that's a cop-out answer, but it's usually how I consult with folk.
I don't think it's a cop-out. That's exactly how I would answer that. Whatever somebody is willing to do. And I would be willing to guess in the example that you gave of the person who was doing 15-minute walks. I'll bet after those 3 months, it probably wasn't a chore for him to make that 15-minute walk 20 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour. Like, those things tend to get much more enjoyable the more you do them. But if you start with such a small goal, you're at least on the path, and that will kind of expand into whatever time is available over time. Has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I remind people of that if you can mix it up, you're going to do better. There was a period of time where I injured my shoulder, and so it didn't matter what kind of strength training I was doing. This sucker was on fire every single time I exercised. So I thought, I've just got to back out and do some rehab and tone down strength training exercises. The next time I went back to the gym, I thought, well, I'm just going to do some deadlifts. I'm going to try to wake up that part of my body again, because it's kind of been a while. And I couldn't believe how sore I was. It was so brutal. And it dawned on me, God, you don't use that part of your body for a period of time, you lose it. And so I made this really conscientious effort to go back to some of the lifts and training routines that I got out of the habit of doing when my shoulder was sore. And it reminded me there's power in mixing this thing up, because the way it strengthens and utilizes our muscles.
Yeah, I love that.
Oh, look, my boss made it.
Oh, hello. How are you?
This is little Daisy. She can't hear you here, but
that's okay. Hi, Daisy. For those listening and not watching, Daisy has made an appearance on the podcast. We're definitely not editing this out. She's absolutely adorable. Glad she joined us.
Oh, thank you.
That's amazing.
Yes. Okay, let me finish. Thanks.
That's great. I love it. I love the pop-in appearances with all the kiddos.
Every single one of my clients, I almost always give them a disclaimer. Hey, at some point in the time, I might get interrupted. I heard Daisy coming up from school, ran inside. That's just a rhythm. So
I love it. I love it. Yeah, like I said, I'm not editing that out. So it is interesting to think of us as a species. Like, we have Olympics, right? Like, you can go to the Olympics and watch hundreds of different events, completely different body types doing all these different things. That's who we are as a species. We're generalists. We can throw and run super fast or jump really high. Like, there's so many different things that we could do. I love that kind of variety, and thinking other species of animals could, if they did the Olympics, there might be 2 things they could do or 3 things they can do. They specialize on a few different things, whereas humans, there's so much variety of things that we can do. So yeah, I definitely love that answer. And look, we all survived the pandemic, right? Like, in 2020, everybody lost their gym memberships. My personal training software can help you filter by, like, water bottles. If you can lift water bottles, you can do chair squats. Like you said, this doesn't need to be prohibitive if you don't have crazy amount of equipment. You go to Amazon and buy a $30 set of bands and use stuff around you in your environment, and you can do something. It doesn't have to be, crazy 1-hour workout 7 days a week. You can always start with right where you are.
Yeah. I want to share another experience. This is very personal to me because my dad is in his 80s. And he got some sores on his legs. And so his doctor said, hey, we got to heal up those sores. So when you're seated, I want you to elevate your legs, so that we can keep the fluid out of his legs. Well, my dad interpreted that he needed to have his legs elevated 24/7. And last time I was down to see him, he showed me his power chair so he can no longer stand up on his own accord. He has to have a power chair. Days, I'm in a presentation now.
She dropped the blueberries.
Okay, I'll come in a minute. So sorry. So my father is now in a power chair and he can't get up without it. And when I was down at his house recently, he says, hey, can you help me get a brace? And I said, a brace for what? A brace for my knee. And I said, well, let's examine your knee. Where does it hurt? And he says, oh, it doesn't hurt. And I said, well, what's wrong with it? And he's like, I just lost the strength. I can't get up. And I'm like, oh, Dad, look, this is a power chair problem. So we've got to help you get in and out of this chair without the lift. And his statement was, but I can't. And I'm like, well, you may not be able to today, but it doesn't mean you can't in a couple of weeks when we start working this. So the exercise became so simple as raise it to this level and this degree, and then force yourself to get out 5 times before you go use the restroom. And so his exercise plan was, how do we set the pitch on his power chair? Because we've got to strengthen his legs. Otherwise, he's in trouble. He's going to end up in a nursing home. And we want to avoid that at all costs.
I love that. Yeah, that's great. We talked a little bit about Eric Collett and your partner at Mind for All Seasons. We talked a little bit about Hal Cramner and his amazing work that he's doing in assisted living facilities. One of my favorite episodes that I've ever done on this show was interviewing not only Eric but also Hal and the person had just left his facility who had basically completely reversed her Alzheimer's, moderate to kind of severe Alzheimer's. She was able to go home. She volunteers at a hospital at 7 years old. She wants to become a health coach. I've seen videos of her meeting some of the people that helped her, like Maria Emmerich, and it's just wonderful, wonderful story. Can you tell us the story of how you and Eric met and what the goal of a Mind for All Seasons is and how you work with people?
Yeah, Eric is another business partner, one of my best friends, and this is a fun story. So I had contracted with an assisted living center down in Arizona. It wasn't Hal Cramner's. This was pre-pandemic. This was like 2016, 2017. And they had started hearing about some of these interventions that we could do in senior care to help seniors age more gracefully and protect their brain. And this assisted living center had a memory care. And our goal was to try to have people in the memory care move into assisted living because they improved, or be able to go home from the assisted living. I went down to train their staff. And when I got down there, they said, okay, well, first we want you to train all of our CNAs. And I thought, goodness, I thought I was going to come down and train the doctors and train the nurse practitioners, right? So there was a little bit of this confusion. I struggled through the training because my focus is on treatment planning and it's on medical intervention. And so I just wasn't dialed into it. How does a CNA get better at taking care of people with dementia? And at the end, they said, hey, Randy, this is really something that you need. You need the behavioral piece as well as the medical piece. And I said, well, I got to start working on that. And they said, we know a guy. Eric Collett is amazing at this. And so I was at the Phoenix airport. I looked up Eric online and called him and said, Eric, I'm going to give you 50% of my contract if you'll come down with me to Arizona and you train the CNAs and I'll train the physician group. And he agreed. And we went down to Arizona together. And when we went down to Arizona, I listened to him train the CNAs and I thought, this guy is legit good at what he does. He's actually amazing. And then he listened to me and he says, Randy, I have several clients that could use that treatment intervention. Could you take my clients and help them as well? And I said, sure. So he then gave me some of his contracts in Idaho to train his clients. And I gave him part of my contract. He started training the clients in Arizona, and it was a match made in heaven. We've never looked back, joined forces at a Mind for All Seasons. And now our goal is twofold. We take clients that don't live in an assisted living center, and our goal is to keep them out, right? We want to train them. Here's all of the risk factors that you have going on. How can we help you avoid that? And then we have the Hal Cramners of the world, who's also become a dear friend. And my gosh, he's so genuine and so real at helping clients. When people move into his place, it's not a residency agreement like most assisted living centers are, like an apartment complex. You just move in and then you're kind of on your own with your doctor. Hal has wrapped his umbrella around these people. And he says, Randy, you help us write the treatment plans and we're going to institute it with integrity and perfection. And so that's where that match made in heaven lies between Hal Cramner and Eric Collett.
That's awesome. I love that. And when you follow them on social media, you see all these people in this assisted living facility, and they're dancing and singing and doing all kinds of fun stuff. And you can tell their health is really improving by the steps that he is taking. And you're right, like the level of care and compassion is very, very genuine on his end. It's really, really cool to see. Now, when we were talking to Eric about a Mind for All Seasons and how you work with people, there's so many different like modalities and options and ways that you can help somebody. How in the world are you able to determine which one is going to be best for which individual? Because there's just so many different things you guys work with.
That's a tough answer to speak generally, but we have a rhythm that we've gotten into to try to help us where is the focus? Where is the priority or the lowest hanging fruit? And the way we do it currently is we gather a very complex health history. So I start asking a million questions. Tell me about your cardiovascular health and your metabolic health. I kind of become the Ben Bickman inquisitor about their metabolic health. Tell me about your GI health. Most of society today has just accepted the fact that they're going to live with irritable bowel. They get super gassy or they have chronic constipation or diarrhea, not realizing that that translates into affecting your neurological health. So we gather the health history first, then we do a very complex and comprehensive set of labs second, and we marry those two in a treatment plan. And I call it the enhanced protocol or the enhanced roadmap, where we take all of their personalized, individualized data and we start prioritizing it. For some people, there's 6 or 7 priorities that become the focus for the next 3 months. And for others, there's 10 or 12. It kind of depends on what they bring to the table at the time we're gathering the history and doing the lab work.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, it is cool the way you approach it and make it so individualized. I really like that. You've told us a lot of really great stories here today. Before we turn you loose, is there any other like major stories that are really standing out to you where you were able to really help somebody not only change their lives, but as we all know, the lives of all the people who are so much affected by mental health issues, the family, the friends, people, caretakers, whatever. Any other stories that really stand out you'd like to share with us today?
I could just bore you with examples, and they're not very boring examples. You asked me early on, we talked about kind of this dietary contributor to brain health, and then we pivoted and talked about blood flow or vascular contributors of brain health. I want to maybe just end with another bucket, and I could come up with 10 buckets, but the last bucket maybe we have time to talk about today is hormone health. In that very assisted living, 2017, one of their nurse practitioners called and said, "Whoa, I got a real doozy for you. I've got a lady who's had really complex mental health problems. She came in, she's tearing the place apart. She won't let anyone help take care of her. She's just struggling terribly. Let me walk through her medicines, and where would you start?" And as I gathered her history, she'd had a hysterectomy at like age 35. It was early in her life. And hormone health is a huge contributor of neurological problems. And so I went through her medicines and I said, look, if you want to start simple, put her on some bioidentical hormones and let's optimize some estrogens and some testosterone. And because she can't sleep at night, let's put her on an oral progesterone. So we did some topical estrogens, testosterone, and some oral progesterone, specifically because from an outsider's perspective, it looked like that could make a difference. About 3 weeks later, this nurse practitioner called me and said, "Okay, dude, I need some continuing ed. What just happened?" And I thought, uh-oh, what did happen? Like, clue me in. And she said, "I showed up to the community to see this lady today, and she's fully dressed. She combed and styled her hair. She sat down at the table and had a very coherent conversation with me over a cup of coffee." This was a lady that couldn't look me in the eye. Her hair was hanging sideways. She refused to let anyone help her, just mean, angry, irritable, and psychotic. And now she is conversationally intact. Her self-care's come back. Now she still had some cognitive problems per se, but 100% reversal. And the only thing we did was we stopped 3 of her psych meds, lowered the dose of 2, and started hormone replacement. And so this nurse practitioner was like, how does that happen? And my response is that hormones have been cheapened. Men think that hormones like testosterone is for increasing your libido and giving you muscle mass. And women think that hormones are for reproductive and sexual health or to suppress a hot flash. And my response is no. Hormones are for neurological and mental and behavioral health. They make a huge difference. So that's a whole nother category that if time would permit, we could talk to. And there's a handful of others.
Yeah, well, I love that. I'm glad you brought that up. Was this person told, if you can recall, I'm not sure, was this person told that the hormones would be harmful to her?
Almost ubiquitously, that's what people are told. People are told that hormones, especially in the women's arena, they're told that hormones will cause breast cancer and blood clots, like your risk of a stroke or a heart attack. That data is so weak, it sucks. It's like terrible data. And I would argue that the number one faux pas in all of medicine is how we have mistreated and castigated hormones in the context of health. Those things are dramatically impacted by today's lifestyle. And without optimizing them, I think it's really hard to get people's mental health and their cognitive health better.
Yeah, I mean, any of the clients that I talk to that take them would punch me in the throat if I tried to take them away from them. You know what I mean? Like they feel so much better on that note. So I'm really glad you brought that up. Is there anything else we need to cover in this conversation?
No, I think that's just a good starting point. And if you want to talk again sometime, or if it's helpful to the audience, you holler.
No, that's great, Randy. This has been an awesome conversation. Again, as we started this conversation, it is so inspiring. And you think about, on an individual level, how impactful this truly is. Like the numbers and the people we can help and whatever is all important. But like when you're talking about an individual and how you can change a life and life of the family and everybody else, it's really, really incredible. So I absolutely love your work. I'm so glad that you were able to take time to be on our show today. Where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Okay, thank you so much. And for our audience, thanks with little Daisy, because sometimes she gets sidetracked and she kept coming in coloring behind me. So thanks for your patience. The best way to find me is www.amindforallseasons.com. And that's my company website. I put up a personalized website, randyvawdrey.com, just because everyone was asking, who is Randy? What does he do? I'm the medical director, but all of the services that we render come through amindforallseasons.com. And that's where Eric is, and Jeff and Matt and Christine, and that's how we coordinate with Hal Cramner. That's really how, if people want to learn more about how to optimize their brain health, that's the place to go.
Excellent. We will link all of that in the notes. Randy Vawdrey, excuse me. Thank you again for all the work that you do, really changing lives out there and finding innovative and excellent ways to help people with their metabolic health, their mental health, and everything that goes along with that. So thank you so very much for everything that you do. And thank you for taking time to be on our show today. We really appreciate you.
Awesome, Casey. Thank you.
Absolutely. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.